Welcome to In a Nutshell, the podcast dedicated to all things agricultural consulting. I'm Dylan Brush here with soil genius and ag consultant Bill Brush, and we're delighted to accompany you on this journey where we break down the different aspects of agricultural consulting. In each episode, we'll dive into the realm of agriculture through the eyes of Bill Brush, where consultants like Bill play a vital role in empowering farmers, agribusiness, and agricultural organizations. If you're passionate about agriculture, problem solving, and enjoy a little bit of detective work, this podcast is tailor-made for you. Welcome back to Agriculture in a Nutshell. Today we're going to be talking about potassium.
Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about that third nutrient on that analysis, the N, P, and the K. We're looking at potassium today. And potassium it's an interesting nutrient because in so many ways it doesn't do anything, but it helps everything. And so because of that, if you look at it in that regard, it's a lot of times it's the catalyst, or it's the ability to make the stomatas work in the leaf surface to take in carbon dioxide and give off oxygen and all the other things that it does. The other thing is it can promote growth. It also helps in cell regulation and how they actually function. Regulates the osmotic pressure in the tissues and the fluids that are going through. So it does so many things, but specifically, it's so essential for so many things. And the other thing in our last podcast, we talked about phosphate not being a high user in plants. We need pounds when we're talking about potassium. And I'll talk to you about how important that is on a lot of crops that are essential, that need a lot of potassium, and what happens when you get into sandy soils versus heavier soils, and where you have to get those numbers to be effective. My friend Neil Kinsey liked to list potassium. He called it the freelancer in plants, meaning, kind of does a lot of things in a lot of different places, and if you don't have it, you're going to be suffer for the lack of it, or you're going to reduce yields, or you're going to do some of both. So let's talk a little bit about potassium the ion. It's a single positive, so it's an anion. It's one of what I call the big four that are on your soil colloid that make up, calcium, magnesium, potassium, and sodium. And amongst those, you're looking at 90% pretty much of everything that's on that soil colloid. So it can be quite important, and it really is essential for so many functions of the plant. I can't stress that enough. Back in the Midwest, if you have low potassium levels and you have a drought situation, those places that are high in potassium will always out-yield those that are low in potassium, because again, it's because of that regulation of the osmotic pressures in the fluids, and they make it more resilient. They make it come back. They make it handle drought much easier than it would if the potassium wasn't there. When you talk about potassium, and we look at, when we talk going backwards on soil structure and the amount of calcium and magnesium you needed in base saturation and how much percentage you need. But one of the things when you get to potassium, I'm going to tell you just simply, if you have a real sandy soil that's down around 5 or 6, you have to get away from base saturation and go into pound. And most of the time you want to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 to 600 pounds of potash for all the crop's needs. If you have a perfect base saturation, and we'll just say you've got a woody crop, a tree crop, or even corn, that you want to get that base saturation up to 7.5. If you're down at a 5 exchange capacity, you will not have enough potassium to do what you need. And so that's why I say when you look at potassium, it uses a lot of pounds. And when you look at removal rates, there's a lot of potassium that's removed with your crop. I mean, there's a reason it's the third one in that group of nutrients. You got to have enough phosphate, you got to have enough nitrogen, and now we're finding with potassium, you have to have enough pounds, or you're really going to suffer from your crop production. One of the things that you want to look at too when you're looking at potassium is, can I build up potassium? Is it possible? Because the higher the pH goes, the less likely it is that you're going to be able to build up potassium on the soil. Once you get up to 6.8 and above, and particularly when you get to 7, there's no hydrogen left for potassium to be able to bully it off the soil colloid and be able to attach itself, because it can't outcompete calcium and magnesium, which are going to be 80 to 85% of everything that's probably there. So how do we build it up?
Now Bill's going to explain how you can effectively build up your potassium.
Well, there's two ways you can do it. I mean, one way is multiple applications, because your potassium, rather than being harvested and mineralized off the soil colloid, are actually used right on the ground. Microbes have that feeding on them right there, and you get some in before it gets tied up. So multiple feedings becomes another way to get more potassium in. Another way is to get it tied up with something else. And what I mean by that is you can, whatever you have as a compost or as a manure, if it's got a certain amount of potassium in it, you can use that because it won't get tied up rapidly. One of the things that we found is that if you do a total potassium test on your soil, there's thousands of pounds there, but they're just not available. And so what we want to do is increase the availability. And there's tricks that we can do to do that. And one of the things, particularly, I'll tell you, this is one of the things I've found that always is very important and makes it work. If you're using a compost, a really good compost, I'm not just talking about any compost, but one that's composted correctly, got the right carbon to nitrogen balance, and it's got good amounts of potassium there, you're going to be able to utilize that as a total extra bank of potassium that microbes can feed off of, particularly in sandy soils. We don't have enough clay, so we're not holding on to enough potassium on it, but we can hold on to it, and it becomes more essential because although potassium, because it's a cation, does not leach, it will leach, particularly in sandy soils. And I say it won't leach well. Most of the time in heavier soils, we don't see that much leachability of potassium because it's got some attraction to all that clay that's in that soil. But when you get down to small amounts of clay in these light sandy soils, it can leach with high volumes of water because there's such pore spaces and not enough material to hold on to. So here's a really, really good application for compost. And it's one that you should be applying probably on an annual basis. You know, it fits in as another whole bank. It's like giving you more clay particles, even though you're adding a place for more storage and nutrients. And so it can be very good. Now, you can only do that if you're testing your compost and know that it has what you want. The other thing you need to check, as we talked a podcast ago, make sure that you can tolerate anything else it has. Is it got high zinc? Oh, I'm low of phosphate. It may actually hurt me. Or it's got a lot of phosphate and I already have plenty of phosphate. So make sure you put all of the nutrients in there. And as we get through our podcast and go through this list and keep on accumulating, one of the things you're going to find is we'll talk about all these interactions because I just can't do them all in any one podcast, but I want you to understand it's like putting pieces together and making it fit for maximum production from the crop that you're growing. And you're only going to get that if you know all the things, the tools that you have to use and where they work best and where they're not as essential or where they don't work quite as good.
Now Bill's going to get into talking about the sources of potassium.
When you talk about potassium, we'll talk about sources, which I think is really important. The two main sources we see in the form of dry potassium, dry products, are sulfate of potash and murate of potash, or potassium chloride. A lot of times we call it murate of potash, but I like to call it potassium chloride because it's one thing that you must be very careful with. If you're putting on high levels of potassium chloride, you're getting a good amount of potassium. Most of the time you're getting at least 60% of what you apply will be potassium ion. Problem is it's attached with chloride. And chloride does a lot of things. One of the things that it jacks up the electroconductivity if you're not careful, which makes the the materials what I call hotter, or they can do some root pruning. The roots don't like that real high electroconductivity. The second thing it can do is it can slow down a robust microbiology. If you're trying to kill bugs, swimming pools, whatever, purifying water, you're putting chloride into it. Well, here you are putting, lots of chloride if you're putting high amounts of potassium chloride. So it slows down your microbiology. So here you are, you're doing a really good job on potassium, but you're slowing down that essential ability of that microbiology to be able to go to work for you. And that really is everything we talk about, is all getting things in place for it to work properly. And even though you have plenty of potash, you have slowed it down by inserting these chloride ions in there. If you got light sandy soils and you put it on there and you have high rainfall, those chlorides are very, very leachable, and they'll move very, very rapidly. If they have a little bit of sodium there, it'll also tie up with sodium and move through the soil profile. So it has the ability to move through. But if you're looking at heavier clay soils, one of the problems you'll get is it'll hang around. Doesn't leach quite as rapidly. If you have low sodiums, it doesn't want to hang up with sodium and go together. And so it's just something to be very careful. So that leaves us with a 50 to 51% material called sulfate of potash. One of the things that you can look at that is it's actually got two nutrients. It's got potassium and it's got sulfur, or sulfate, which is the usable form of sulfur that plants need. So a lot of people look at, well, it's a lot more expensive than potassium chloride, so I'm going to use chloride. I can put more units on, etc. But you're downgrading the value of the sulfate too. So make sure when you're looking at your cost per unit, you're just comparing potassium versus potassium on this unit in potassium chloride versus this unit's potassium and potassium sulfate. And remember, that sulfate has a value. That crop needs it. So if you're applying it pre-season, it's a good way to get started, and you have sulfate from a winter of leaching sulfur or sulfate ions out of your soil, and it's a good way to start off the season. The main reason that we just don't use as much potassium sulfate as we can is, guess what? It's expensive, very expensive, one of the most expensive nutrients that we apply. But it's one thing that we do need it in a high enough percentage on that soil colloid to make it work. In terms of the lower exchanges, we need it in pounds. Higher exchanges, we can go with lower percentages because we'll have enough pounds. So when we're looking at those are the two primary potassiums that are used in the dry form. In the liquid form, it's really difficult to get a lot of liquid potassium because one of the things is that they are hard to maintain at high concentrations, meaning a normal, if you try to put sulfate of potash into solution by itself, you're lucky to get more than 5 to 6%. There's a product that for years it's been out here. It's a 108 where you're able to get 8, but it's a lot of work to be able to get up to 8% potassium in that liquid. So what we fall back to a lot of times is what we call KTS, or potassium thiosulfate. It's a little bit different when we look at thiosulfates. They're not quite the same as pure sulfates, and depending on the purity of where they got those thiosulfates are used in a lot of different applications throughout a lot of different industries, and sometimes those are used. Thiosulfate you clean up and react them with potassium, and what you make is a 25% potassium and a 17% sulfate, even though the sulfate is not a pure sulfate, but that's the equivalent of it. So you have a 002517, which is a nice product. Be careful. I have seen damage from people who use it as their sole source of potassium, even though they like to run it through their irrigation system. One of the things is that there's something with the thiosulfate. For some reason, I've seen problems when you put too much, and it's detrimental to the plant growth, plant health, for sure. So be careful with it. I like to use small shots often if you're going to use that, rather than putting out 20 or 30 or 40 gallons at one time, you were much better off to be putting it out in 5-gallon increments over a longer period of time. One, you'll get a better uptake, and the second thing is that you don't normally run into the problems that you can with big applications of a single application of KTS or potassium thiosulfate. There are a lot of, there's some new products that are entering in. We're seeing potassium carbonate. We're seeing some other, what I call high-end chelated potassiums. They're usually mixed with phosphates and a little bit of nitrogen. Those are also in there in the marketplace. But for the bulk and the kind of the meat and potatoes way to go, it's normally sulfate of potash and muriate of potash. And muriate of potash, using it judiciously, a lot of times in the off season, meaning we put it out, nothing's actively growing, and we push that chloride through during the winter with plenty of rain. And when we start in the spring and plant, we've removed a lot of the chloride out of the soil profile. If we've got our soil balanced, that the leachability of chloride is very, very high. So that's a really good place to utilize it. You can utilize part of your budget and put some out there, and then maybe put some SOP or sulfate of potash in the spring, and you can maybe get all your potash needs with what's also in your soil, putting all those things together. One of the things that I've found over the years is that balanced soils will allow you to mineralize more potassium out of your soil. I've done this a lot on almonds or almonds, some of the other tree crops, and we've done it by active microbiology. And the only reason I can say that it had to be that is that we removed more pounds than we added, and yet our soil numbers stayed the same. So the only way that can happen is actually get into some of this other potassium that's locked up and not available. And the microbiology, as it's nice and active, gets into that and allows it to be freed up and be available to the soil and to the crop through the soil mechanisms. So that's another, like I say, wonderful thing about having microbiology that's active. You can actually get at a lot of the stuff that's locked up in that bank that otherwise would not be able to be there. When you're looking at, if you're one that likes to work towards using compost, and I highly recommend it on light sandy soils, it's got a tremendous ability to hold water as well as hold those nutrients that are bound up with it. Potassium becomes quite available from it over time. That carbon material that you have there gets balanced out with that good carbon to nitrogen ratio of about 12 to 15 to 1. 12 to 15 to 1 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. It allows it to be broken down by the microbial activity and release those over a period of time. The thing is, it won't really build. People like to think that they'll build organic matter through using a lot of compost and manures. It really, depending on what your temperature and what kind of climate you're in, you'll have a hard time building any of those up that organic matter and making pure soil humus, just because the temperatures most of the time are so hot, and a lot of that's applied to the top of the soil, which is a really good place to utilize it, but over a period of time it's going to oxidize and it's going to not be there for next year. So I always tell people, don't look at a compost application, look at a compost program. One in which you're adding so much either every year or every other year, depending on what you're finding on soil tests, and allowing those microbes to be on a steady diet where they're looking for that compost, that carbon material, to be able to complete their life cycles and make them active in your soil. When you're looking at potassium, and particularly one of its primary, what I always look at, maybe not the primary function, but one that's very recognizable, is if you have poor standability, say poor standability in your corn or your wheat, oats, barley, or you have poor limb structure on tree crops, vine crops, where they get way more sagging than they need to. They don't have enough upright growth. That starts with potassium. It is the key to strength, limb strength, stalk strength. And when you don't have enough, It'll try to make its use as much as it can to maximize the crop at the detriment of the wood development or the stalk development. So when you go by and you see a lot of corn, big wind came up, it's all laying flat, check those potash levels. Most of the time you'll find that they're low. See tree crops that have a bunch of broken limbs as the crop matures and it gets to maximum weight, all of a sudden scaffolds or limbs are breaking. I always think first, look for potassium. That's the one I would think you would be missing first. As it outgrows itself, it doesn't put enough potassium into the wood. When you're looking at tissues, early in the season, you want to see nitrogen. And you want to see your phosphorus and all your micronutrients and some potassium. But as you get to maturity, you want nitrogen running out and potassium strengthening everything you have there. So you're in the mid-season, you're pushing that potassium along and it keeps utilizing it all the way to the end. I always like to say it's a big part of developing, the crop at the end of the cycle. You need it throughout for all the different functions I talked about earlier, but really what you need is to be able to give it enough at the end. In other words, you should see your nitrogen waning and your potassium on the rise as you get to 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through your crop growing, because you really don't need to grow anymore. So the nitrogen's sort of not necessarily needed anymore. But what we do need is to strengthen all that wood and mature that crop and make sure that it continues to basically be able to handle the stresses and rigors of its climate as we get near the end when we're maturing that crop. The last thing you want to do is spend all that time and effort to have a really nice crop, everything's going well, and you run out of potassium. And either you get lodging and you have a hard time picking it up, or it doesn't finish the way you want it to finish. You don't get good bushel weight on your cereal crops. You don't get good weights on your nut crops. A lot of times you won't find the same amounts of sugar and sweetness in your fruits, and giving your things like vegetables, celery and stuff, that nice crunch that it needs. And so a lot of those things are potassium dependent, but they're normally needed almost all on the tail end of when you're growing your crop. Again, as I talked the other day about phosphorus, I'm going to talk the same way about potassium. There are so many individual things that over time I'll add to different podcasts. You'll hear me add when we're talking about, say, about limb strength. Well, I just talked about that. You'll hear me talk about other nutrients that are essential for stalk strength and strength of limbs. And so they'll all be intertwined as we go through this process of going through the nutrients one by one. And so don't feel that this is everything you need to know about potassium. It's just the beginning. And as we go through these, and I have more and more people read these, or listen to them, I should say, and then they come back with questions, those questions will stimulate me to come back to some other areas and add on to a lot of the information that I'm giving you today. But remember, we're going through the major ones. We talked about calcium, magnesium, not because they were needed in the most volume, but they're needed for soil structure, which is essential for everything else to work. So we've done calcium, magnesium. Nitrogen, it's so important, and because of the different forms that are taken up by the plant, that we had even 2 on it, and now we've had 1 on phosphorus, and now this is 1 on potassium. And we will begin to put together, once we get through all the nutrients, we'll come back and we'll start to piece them together. What's the course of action? How do we fertilize? How do we put on the nutrients? When's the best time to put them on? How do we make the most of a dollar budget? Where do we need to concentrate those dollars? It's kind of like having a tractor, and we concentrated all the money on having the most powerful engine and having the best transmission, but we didn't put any money into tires and wheels. Didn't do us much good. So you need to understand where those monies need to be placed, because it doesn't work without certain things. And so we always want to go back into our budgets and see where they are. Potassium's always a struggle to fit into your budget because it's expensive, but it's essential. I keep coming back. It's N, P, and K. One of the things about phosphorus is if I can get the level built up, it'll last for quite a while because I don't drag a lot out of it. It's not a lot removal. It's essential, and it's got to be enough to make the plant do its functions. Potassium's different. Potassium, you're using pounds. Just like you're using pounds of nitrogen, you're using pounds of potassium. So every year, you've got to renew that. You have to see how much was removed with my crop. How much am I going to be able to mineralize out? And you only do that with consistently looking at good soil tests. Because if you say, well, I'm going to take a soil test every third or fourth year, how do you have any idea how much got mineralized out? How do you know what you have available for that growing crop? And the more we guess, the more likely we are to be wrong. So if we can continue to find out through good soil testings, finding out our levels and making sure we're keeping those levels at optimum levels throughout the growing season and applying at the right time and understanding the constraints of farming, meaning there's certain times that once we get to this level, we don't have an opportunity to add any more materials, so we have to have everything on. So those are all things that we just, like I like to tell a lot of my clients, I mean, we go through our soil samples, we put together a fertility program, and immediately it isn't going to be perfect because we have to farm. What I mean by that is it's an imperfect science. We have to farm to the best of our ability given soil type, climate, no rain, lots of rain, when I can apply it, what kind of equipment I've got to apply it, can I get it on, what kind of form of irrigation do I have, how good's my irrigation water, it goes on and on. So it's almost impossible to be perfect. So I always try to tell my growers, anybody that listens to me, let's not focus on perfection, let's focus on progress above perfection. The closer we strive for perfection, the more progress we will make, and we'll get better and better at what we do. And as we do, yields increase, because increase in yields is essential not just for us and our survival, but also for the people that we're growing food for on this planet. So with that, I'll let you go for today. Hopefully you got some good insights into potassium, and good luck in your next growing season.
Thank you for another fantastic episode of Agriculture in a Nutshell, Bill. I'm sure that everyone listening very much so appreciated what you had to say about potassium. And for everyone listening, make sure to leave a comment if you have any questions regarding anything that Bill had to say. Also, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more episodes in the future, and always stay curious.